A naturescape where land meets the rivers meet the seas, and where the seas meet the islands, all in a single region. The ups and downs of the tides here were as tumultuous as my beating heart as I traveled through the waters in a narrow boat. Hi, I'm Kartika, a fellow learner who's excited by all things heritage and is forever curious to know more about the many forms in which heritage shapes our everyday lives. I tagged along with Team Inherit as they traveled far and wide to gather stories about our country's natural and culinary heritage. And today I'm taking you through a region that has fascinated me the most. But before we dive in, let's zoom out a little, shall we?
If you were to look at it from a 30,000 foot view, if you're flying in a plane above it, what it looks like is several thousand snakes on the ground, writhing through thick green forests, and then meeting the Bay of Bengal in this gigantic fan.
Imagine a place where the fresh water from India's mighty rivers meet the salt water of the sea while forming several islands and creating an ecosystem brimming with life, where magnificence and threat to life are equally present in every single step you take. How many of you have guessed the place I'm talking about already?
Sundarbans is the many-tongued delta, the many-tongued mouth of three massive rivers, the Ganga, the Brahmaputra, and the Meghna. They come together, and then they have these, distributaries and the many khals that go off and then meet the Bay of Bengal. These deltas are made of silt, which prompted the geographer William Van Schendel to say that Bangladesh is essentially the Himalayas flattened out. So you're really standing, when you're standing on that silt, on those islands, you're essentially standing on a bit of the Himalayas, which has come all the way down, carted down by these rivers.
The reason why this region, this space is fascinating is because if you look at NASA maps, you will see that the contours of islands are forever changing. So some rivers become larger, some become thinner. Islands, portions of islands disappear. Other islands have new mud banks, collected along the sides, and therefore the island increases in space. So it is a geography on the move. It is one that is constantly shifting.
So for me, the moment that I knew that I want to stay here was the moment when I arrived the first time, and this place that I stayed in a villager's house, and the jungle was just in front, and there was this window through which I was lying down at night, and I saw the moon, the mangrove, and the tide going back, and then in the morning when I got up, the tide was up. So for me, it was too magical just to let it go.
Our lived world is such a magical place indeed. And I felt that while heading out on a tiny boat in the middle of the delta at 11 p.m. with the cold winds brushing my face. And the sight I ended up seeing, I can never forget it. It was pitch black, and I remember the mesmerizing bioluminescent patterns created beneath the boat with every stroke of the oar. And the skies above were full of glittering stars. And this was just the beginning of my journey in this unmistakably fascinating space.
This ecosystem over here is incredibly biodiverse because I think anywhere where there are two ecoregions that join, where you have the salt and the saline water with the sweet, you have a mixing of it, and that becomes a very, very biodiverse area. And so not just what you see over land, but even under, right? All the fish, the crustaceans, the sea life, the estuarine life, It's brimming with that life. And then, of course, the mangroves, we call it mangroves, but there are so many different kinds of trees there, which very interestingly, which is also very stark on the Bangladeshi side. These mangroves, the way they work is they have these snorkel roots. So they have these pneumatophores which come up from the mudflats. And when you're on the Bangladeshi side, you can see the differences between the pneumatophores. And each species of mangrove plants has a different kind of snorkel. It doesn't look like the other one, you know?
I hope you know that there are at least 84 different types of mangroves. I saw so many roots with different shapes and designs, some that were sharp like a spear, and some that looked like fingers poking out of the water. And don't even get me started on all the different kinds of birds and animals I spotted there, from the brown-winged kingfishers to masked finfoots, monitor lizards, gharials, turtles, and snakes. I even saw a fishing cat with its webbed feet and was told that I was quite lucky to have spotted it. The people of the islands seemed to know the land they lived in so intimately. They had this oneness with their surrounding that was quite inspiring, and it made me wonder, how did the people build their lives to settle here in this space of constant wonder and danger?
The history of human inhabitants in Sundarban is not very long. Maybe 100 years, 120 years, when the human settlements were brought here. So just a small story that there was this gentleman called David Hamilton who worked in East India Company. He was going back to England. Back in the days, you would go by ship, and he saw this huge landmass called Sundarban, and there were no human beings. So what he did was he bought the land from the British East India Company, and he invited landless people to come and make this place hospitable. Thousands, and I think hundreds of thousands people came from neighboring states on this island, so that this would be divided from the saltwater rivers. So people came, and thousands of them were killed with snake bites, crocodiles, tiger attacks, but the rest who stayed, they could make this embankment.
So basically, people can't go and settle on a forested island because you would have to build a mud wall around it, right? And you can't. So the forested islands have remained forested. The only island in the late 70s that was inhabited was anyway a plantation island called Moridchapi, where the government had tamarisk and coconut trees. And so refugees came and settled on that island, and that is a very bloody history, which remains, for the islanders of that region. But otherwise, apart from that island, that anyway wasn't a forested island, there has not been any forest taken over because of the fact that you cannot go and settle on a forested island.
दो भाग है सुंदरबन का, एक सॉल्ट वाटर रिवर है और एक लैंड है जहाँ पे ह्यूमंस रहते हैं, और बीच में एक बांध है जिसको क्रिएट किया गया, और इस बांध के इस तरफ मीठा पानी है और उस तरफ सॉल्ट वाटर है. तो नेचर ने कैसे प्ले किया है और कैसा प्ले करता रहा है कि ये दोनों के मिश्रण में ये कैसे सुंदरता से बाहर निकला.
So no 2 seconds are the same in this region. Every time there's something different happening. And if you were to put, if you were to do a time lapse of the tides coming in and out, it's almost as if the mangrove is breathing, It's up, you inhale, exhale, and it is fascinating to watch. And all life is governed by tides.
One can never be firmly rooted on the ground when it can be literally swept away by the rising and falling tides. In order to sustain there for the long term, people are extremely attuned to the naturescape and its unpredictabilities. Each of their livelihoods that are dependent on the forests require specific skill sets and demands an in-depth understanding of the weather, land, water, and non-humans.
All of their livelihoods, like whether it's crab collecting, whether it's fishing, whether it is prawn seed collecting, all of that requires them to interact with that landscape on a very visceral level, very deeply. It's not something that's at arm's length. They are literally up to their neck in that landscape.
A lot of villagers going for fishing with their very young children as well. And those children, when they come of age, there's also this story going in the back of their mind where they've heard stories that their uncles and the fathers have gone to the jungle and they've collected honey and they've collected fish almost from the mouth of the tiger. So when you are a youngster, when you're coming of age, and you've heard these stories all your life, then what is that that attraction that is there to go and to try for yourself what exactly lies out there? And we see a youngster going into the forest to come of age, I think. And let's make this a boring aspect as well. It is the cash crop. It's like a cash crop. You go into the tiger reserve to collect honey for 10 days. You earn the same amount of money that you would earn, say, being as a daily laborer 3 months in Chennai or Andaman.
If the inhabitants do not venture into the forests and work only in the islands, their income might not be very sustainable, often prompting them to outmigrate for a few months to work in other parts of India. The resources and interactions of the people with the forest lands illustrate how the forest can be a generous giver. But the forest is also a merciless taker. The forests and the waters are not only rich with life-giving resources, but also crocodiles, snakes, and much more. Not to mention the cyclones.
People who live in the Sundarbans, who have to go on land from wherever they are, they go by boat and then they have to go on land to do their work, like either collecting wood or honey or whatever. It's crucial for them to have a boat ready when they're done for them to go back. Because if the boat hasn't moved to where the water is, or if the boat isn't ready where the water is and the tide goes off, the boat's going to be stranded. And for these people to be stranded on an island once it gets dark or for any length of time is like inviting death, because the tigers are there and are ready.
When I was in class 8, and we had met some of the famous scientists working on the Sundarban and on the reasons why tigers in the Sundarban are perhaps man-eaters. So they had forwarded quite a few theories, one of them being that because this region is a region with brackish water, tigers perhaps needed human flesh for a certain dietary balance. Others said that usually tigers mark their territories with their urine, but here they couldn't do so because the tides washed off any mark the tiger might leave on islands, and therefore these very powerful swimmers had no idea of territory and could swim to any place, and therefore they swam over to little boats where there were humans or to islands which were inhabited.
It was on a full moon night, that is the day of the full moon, so the tide was the highest or the lowest, and so we went in when it was low tide. And I saw them step into the water, and they were searching for prawn seed and so on. And I realized that they're so vulnerable at this time because there are river sharks, there are crocodiles there. There could even be a tiger which could swim across right there. They are open to the elements, and there's nothing to protect them. And not just the women. Her 10-year-old son was with her as well, and many of the other women who were fishing also had youngsters with them who were also fishing, and so it's something that I don't think people who go on a boat to see tigers in the Sundarbans as tourists even realize that there is this huge part to the Sundarbans that is not a joyride.
The other profession that is relatively new and that is coming up, it's been about 20 years, is tourism. and you have more and more hotels and boats that take tourists into the forest.
Why is there tiger tourism? Because conservation has, it's a big charismatic species, and you have a lot of marketing around it. Conservation has worked. There, people are. You've been strict about it, and so on. Poaching has fallen, and so there is that. But then, what? So, who are the guardians of conservation? The forest department. Again, who's working in the forest department? Not necessarily people from the Sundarbans, right? So, again, these two. What should I say? These two forms of these two parts of the economy, where you have conservation and you have tourism, they both tend to exclude the most marginalized communities in the Sundarbans, and there is therefore that kind of resentment that the tiger is more important than the people of the Sundarbans.
It makes sense that tigers would be the biggest draw to the region for the tourists. Imagine the excitement centered around spotting a Bengal tiger. But as days went by, I came to understand the complicated relationship people shared with the tigers. Some estimates state that over 3,000 men and women have been killed by tigers in the last 5 decades here. The number could definitely be more. Despite this, the bond between the tigers and the inhabitants isn't that of constant conflict. It is as intricately tangled as the mangrove roots themselves.
People were talking about tigers as if they had emotions. This was very new to somebody who had grown up looking at wild animals through a cage. Here they spoke about tigers having been migrants, having come all the way from Southeast Asia because they were hunted for their fur, for their bones. And so they had, in a way, escaped from that place and found the Sundarban, a godforsaken place, but a safe space for them. And they said, the same thing happened with us when a few hundred years later, we came to this space. Tigers understood what it meant to be a migrant because they themselves had migrated. So they allowed us to settle here. And so they might be cantankerous and they might kill us, but actually they're also very compassionate creatures.
This ability to perceive the deep-rooted intraconnectedness across species that the people there hold should teach us a lesson or two. And this inherent perspective they have seeps in all their interactions with the space.
Forest land is considered very sacred. You cannot pee on it, you cannot defecate on it, you have to keep it very, very clean. So it is, it's a lot of constraint to go there. And you have to respect that. And if you work in the forest, whatever your religious background, you need to venerate Ma Bonobibi. And I don't say worship, I say venerate. And there's a clear distinction for me between veneration, which is more like acknowledging a superpower. Her worship is once a year, usually around mid-January, sometimes mid-February. And basically people give her fruits and flowers and, batasha, muri, khoi. Her shrines are never shut. You have to leave the doors open. You have to, basically they are very inclusive shrines. And as I said, you don't need to be Hindu or Muslim or Christian. You just need to have a certain respect for the forest.
These rituals comprise an essential part of their lifestyle and belief system. A similar reverence is also attached to the river goddess. The deities are not boxed within a single religion. They function as embodiments of ecological beliefs and induce faith in the life of the foresters. However, it's not only the people who go into the forest that follow these practices. The villagers who stay in the islands, especially the women, also follow certain rituals that have a deep cultural significance.
The rituals that they observe when, say, a husband goes to the forest to collect honey, the wife would not practice the rituals of a married woman till the time the husband is in the forest. So, for example, what do? They do not cook at home till the time the men folk is in the forest, which means they will not turn on their oven for 5 days, 6 days, 3 days, or 7 days, or 15 days that the men folk are not there. They would not wear the sindoor that generally a Bengali women wear. They would not wear the shaka pola that the married women wear here. And so I tried to find out why would they do this. They would eat food given by their neighbors. They would not cook in their home. I think they kind of, it is their way of showing the forest or the Bonobibi or the tiger, the incarnation of tiger, the Rai, that we are already widow, and so spare our husband, or spare our husband, and we are doing this for you. We are taking something from you, and we are giving this penance in return.
What is very beautiful about the way in which islanders think of the space is that they believe that the forest is under the protection of Ma Bonobibi, and that she basically makes sure that everybody manages to survive.
Faith in Bonobibi and the fact that the forest will protect them if they go in with a pure heart, it's still there, is very much there. Which is not to say that everybody goes into the forest with a pure heart. There are people who are very clearly, poachers or people who want to profit from the forest without, and not for sustenance, purely sustenance. And there are those issues as well.
The tiger cannot be too greedy about his wood and his honey. And so, but however, he can kill if there is a greedy human that comes to the forest.
It is this faith and belief in the need for a just human-nature interaction that helps them navigate these difficult terrains. But I still want to know more about what drives the people here and their unwavering connection to this challenging land. Is it the deep cultural ties, the sense of community, or perhaps the belief in their traditions and deities?
So, we all know that Sundarban is a very specific place, and the specificity comes from the dangers that is attached to it. So, why would someone choose to stay in a place like this? And we are not talking about a handful of people. We are talking about thousands and thousands of people. There are 4 million people who stay in Sundarban, in the total area of Sundarban.
Why people still choose to live in a landscape like this goes back to history. They are settlers. They have no other place to go. They have come from a similar landscape on the other side. Many of them are, people who came before partition, Bangladesh, India partition, and have come to fish and find crab and stuff like that. They do see these regions as their home, and they know how to survive in it. Whereas that cannot be said for other landscapes in Bengal or in India for them.
For me, Sundarban, in spite of all the dangers and in spite of all the life risk that is involved, a certain aura about Sundarban keeps the people hooked to Sundarban. I am being one of them.
The place is an ecologically, sociologically, politically, and culturally challenging landscape. But it supports a unique way of life for those who call it home. The naturescape, waterscape, and culturescape are tightly intertwined, but this twine will soon be hanging by a thread, ready to snap at any time due to inaction. There have been increasing troubles for the delta due to various environmental concerns. The low-lying mangrove forests are really vulnerable to rising sea levels, getting flooded more often, taking bigger hits from storm surges, and dealing with increasing coastal erosion.
As a person who's been staying here, the cyclones have been very frequent last few years. The Sundari trees have have started to grow in less numbers than they used to grow because of the high salt content in the water. And the fishing, which the local fishermen, even before I came, and they talk about those times and the times that I had arrived here, that there would be more fish when they would cast their net than what they get now. So in certain ways, the fishes are pushed more and more towards the core areas, far from where the human inhabitants are there.
The Bay of Bengal throws a lot of storms at the Sundarbans in general. It's not called the beating heart of monsoon Asia, South Asia for nothing. That is where those storm systems build, and that is where it comes. But the storm surges have been extra and quite devastating in the 2008, 2009, very recently with Amphan as well. They've been really bad. And what ends up happening is that because of the storm surges and the increased storm surges, the saline water has been pushing through into the farmlands. And once that happens, it renders the farms completely useless for a large period of time. And so people have to grapple with that.
The Sundarbans, being the largest delta and mangrove forests of the entire world, is an extremely fragile and an essential hotspot that sustains not only humans and non-human lives, but also the land itself. Everything about the region is precious and vulnerable, unpredictable and amazing. What also cannot be overlooked is that it is a carbon sink that captures and stores atmospheric carbon dioxide at one of the highest rates across all naturescapes worldwide. But what it in turn needs is also protection.
It's important to preserve the Sundarbans, obviously, because of the kind of ecosystem it is. It's a very important ecosystem, ecologically fragile, as well as extremely important from a perspective of biodiversity, and also that the mangroves are the first line of defense when it comes to storm surges, when it comes to rising sea levels, when it comes to all of that, right? So from a biological point of view, from an ecological point of view, there is no question that the Sundarbans needs to be protected.
So it's an incredibly beautiful place. It's the lungs of Kolkata. It is, a place which is allowing the rest of us to breathe.
If Sundarban goes in underwater, Calcutta will not be saved. Calcutta will not remain afloat. It will go underwater as well. The danger is not only residing in Sundarban, it goes further, but our vision is not going further than Sundarban when it comes to dangers.
Culturally, the people are proud to be from there, and they want to have a shot at their way of life. They want to be able to fish in those waters because that's their homeland. If you lose the people who know the place, who know the name, who have the name memories of the land, who have the local knowledge, who know what lives here, what doesn't live here, what can live here, what cannot live here, if you lose that, then you almost certain have lost the place, because then you'll have interlopers come in who don't know one from the other, and they're quite apt to kind of clear cut maybe even endangered species off the whole place and then build something there and think that it is the way to do it.
In this very difficult environment where you have cyclones, where you have tigers, where you have rivers changing courses and breaking up islands and creating new ones, in this shifting terrain where nothing is stable, you have humans that have come up with a beautiful understanding of what it means to live in this dangerous terrain. And so this is why, they have this story about Bonobibi, Ma Bonobibi, and how she protects people as well as tigers, and how she brings about a certain truce between the two is very important for us to, it teaches us how to coexist in our environments, right? If people there can coexist with man-eating tigers in one of the more dangerous places on Earth, does it not teach us urbanites, us people living in other environments, to also be a lot more respectful of what we see around us, of our environment?
So I think that knowledge that of local geographies, this is not specific to the Sundarbans. This is everywhere, right? No matter whether it's in a city, it might be Bombay, Mumbai, it might be Bangalore, it could be anywhere. If you don't understand the local geography, you're far more apt to lose it. And once lost, it's far more difficult to regain and restore that resilience of the land, which we need today in the face of climate change.
It is this idea of, hey, we all need to live together. We need to compromise. We need to coexist. We need to find a solution in being able to depend on the forest without killing it, right? So this is the message that I find very beautiful in this part of the world, and it's a cultural heritage that we need to respect and we need to protect.